At his wife's funeral, a veteran Navy SEAL stood in silence, feeling like everything in his life had just ended. Hours later, in a quiet lawyer's office, he received only a strange iron key and a hand-drawn map. The map led deep into the northern forest, to a hidden cabin covered in flowers. With his loyal German shepherd, he followed it, not knowing he was stepping into a secret his wife had built for years. What he found there would bring strangers millions of dollars and a truth far bigger than he imagined. Now, he must decide, walk away and forget it all, or protect what she left behind. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Veteran Dog Stories. The morning in the small northern town arrived like a quiet confession. The world wasn't ready to speak out loud. Cold light spilled across the empty streets, pale and clean, as if the sky had been washed overnight. Tall pine trees stood in still rows along the edge of town, unmoving, solemn, like silent sentries guarding something older than memory. The air carried the faint scent of damp earth and distant snow melting somewhere deep in the mountains. And beneath that sky, Rowan Hale stood alone. He was a man carved by time and pressure. At 43, his body still held the discipline of a Navy SEAL. Broad shoulders, a lean but powerful frame, the kind of strength that didn't need to prove itself. His face was angular, weathered in a way that came not from age, but from years spent surviving things most people never saw. A rough stubble framed his jaw, never quite clean, never fully wild. His blue-gray eyes were steady, but hollowed by something deeper than fatigue. Rowan didn't cry. He hadn't cried during the funeral. He hadn't cried when they lowered the coffin into the ground. And now, standing just outside the small wooden church, he realized something quietly terrifying. He didn't feel anything at all. Grief, he thought, was supposed to come like a storm. But this was worse. This was silence. At his side, a large German shepherd shifted slightly, brushing against his leg. Ash. 5 years old, black and tan coat, lean and muscular, in the way only working dogs ever were. His posture was alert, even in stillness. Ears slightly forward, eyes constantly scanning the environment. Not out of fear, but out of habit. He had once been a military K-9, trained to detect explosives, to read tension, to act before danger could fully reveal itself. Now, he stood close enough that Rowan could feel the warmth of him. Not pressing, not demanding, just there. A quiet presence, a reminder. Rowan exhaled slowly and rested a rough hand on the dog's head. Ash didn't look up. He didn't need to. They had spent too many years together for that. The lawyer's office was only a short walk from the church, but the distance felt stretched. Like time itself had decided to move slower for him. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and old coffee. A receptionist with tired eyes and careful movements led Rowan down a narrow hallway. Ash walked beside him without a leash, silent, controlled, his paws barely making a sound against the floor. They entered a small office. Behind the desk stood a thin, aging man with neatly combed gray hair and narrow shoulders that seemed to fold inward slightly, as if life had pressed on him too long. His name was Elias Boone, a local attorney who had spent decades handling land deeds and quiet inheritances in this town. He had the kind of face people trusted, not because it was warm, but because it had learned how to carry other people's burdens without breaking. "Mr. Hale," he said gently, "I'm very sorry for your loss." Rowan nodded once and sat. Ash lowered himself beside him, but not fully relaxed. His ears remained upright. There was someone else in the room, a man leaning back in his chair like he didn't belong in a place shaped by grief. Victor Crane. Late 40s, tall, lean, dressed in a charcoal coat that was too clean for this town. His dark hair was carefully styled, his expression sharp, almost amused. There was something restless in the way his fingers tapped lightly against the armrest. Impatience disguised as confidence. Victor had always been that kind of man. The kind who measured people by what they were worth. "Well," Victor said casually, glancing between Rowan and the lawyer. "Let's not drag this out." Rowan didn't respond. Elias Boone opened a folder slowly. "Your wife left a will," he began. "It's straightforward." Rowan expected something small, a house, savings, something familiar. Instead, Elias placed two objects on the desk, a small iron key and a folded map. Rowan stared at them. "That's it?" he asked quietly. Elias hesitated, then nodded. "There is also a property, land in the northern forest. It includes a structure." Victor let out a short laugh. "Oh, you mean the shack?" he said. "Yeah, I remember that." Rowan's eyes shifted slowly toward him. Victor leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, smiling in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Your wife bought that place years ago," he said. "Middle of nowhere. No road worth driving, no power, nothing but trees and rot. I saw the paperwork once." Rowan frowned slightly. "She never told me." Victor shrugged. "Guess she had her little secrets?" Ash's head lifted. The shift was subtle, but immediate. A low growl rolled through his chest, not loud, not aggressive, but deep. The kind of sound that came from recognition, not instinct. Victor stiffened. "Control your dog." Rowan's hand rested on Ash's neck, firm but calm. "He's under control," Rowan said quietly. Ash didn't take his eyes off Victor. And Rowan knew, without needing explanation, that the dog didn't trust him. Ash rarely misjudged people, and when he did this, it wasn't a mistake. As Elias continued explaining the property, Rowan unfolded the map. A narrow road, a bend through the forest, a small X deep between two ridges. His fingers paused. For a moment the room faded, and something quiet but sharp, cut through his memory. A smell. Earth, damp leaves, wild herbs crushed under boots. Rowan blinked. He had smelled that before. Not here. At home. On Elena's jacket. Late at night. On weekends, she said she was visiting friends. Ash shifted closer, nose lowering toward the map. Then he let out a soft, almost inaudible whine. Rowan's chest tightened. This wasn't new. It had never been new. He had just never looked closely enough. They left the office without another word. Outside, the sky had grown colder. The mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks wrapped in pale cloud. Rowan stood on the sidewalk, map in one hand, key in the other. The metal felt heavier than it should. Ash sat beside him, staring toward the distant tree line. Rowan followed his gaze. Somewhere out there. She had been going, for years, and he hadn't known. That night the house felt wrong, not empty, wrong. Every object seemed slightly out of place, as if the world had shifted half an inch and never told him. Rowan moved through the rooms slowly. The kitchen still held two mugs on the counter. One had a faint ring of dried coffee at the bottom. The other was clean. Elena's. He picked it up. Sunflowers painted along the rim. She used it every morning. He set it back down carefully. Ash followed him from room to room, never leaving more than a few steps between them. Not anxious, not restless, just present. In the living room, Rowan sat heavily on the couch. The key lay on the table. He stared at it for a long time. Then the memories began to surface. Elena coming home with dirt on her sleeves. The smell of plants he couldn't name. Notebooks she closed when he walked in. Once, a map. folded quickly, hidden under a stack of mail. At the time, he hadn't asked. He had been tired, angry, numb, fighting battles that followed him home from places no longer on any map. She had watched him through all of it. Quietly, patiently. And somewhere along the way, she had started building something. Alone. Rowan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered. Ash walked over and pressed his nose gently against Rowan's hand. Not a command, not a signal, just a reminder. Rowan let out a slow breath and ran his fingers through the dog's fur. "You knew something, didn't you?" he murmured. Ash didn't move, but his tail tapped once against the floor. The wind outside shifted, brushing softly against the windows. Rowan stood. He picked up the map, folded it carefully. Then, the key. For the first time since the funeral, something inside him changed. Not hope, not yet, but direction. He slipped the key into his pocket. Ash stood immediately, ready. Rowan looked toward the dark outline of the mountains beyond the town. "All right," he said quietly. "We're going." Ash's ears lifted, and in the silence that followed, it almost felt like the world itself was listening. The forest did not feel like a place that wanted to be found. It welcomed light, yes. Sunbeams filtered through tall pines and scattered across the ground like broken glass. The air was clean, almost too clean, carrying the scent of moss, water, and something faintly sweet that Rowan couldn't immediately name. A narrow stream cut through the earth nearby, its surface catching the light in quiet flickers. Birds moved overhead, calling to one another in distant, echoing notes. Everything was alive. And yet, the deeper Rowan stepped into it, the more it felt like something was watching. Not in fear, not in danger, but in patience. Rowan Hale moved carefully through the clearing, boots pressing into the soft ground, eyes scanning everything without appearing to look. Years of training had carved that habit into him. He wasn't searching for threats. He was measuring absence, noticing what didn't belong. And right now, what didn't belong was the silence. Behind him, the cabin stood half buried in green. What had once been wood was now layered with vines thick as rope, twisting and crawling over every surface. White flowers bloomed in clusters, small and delicate, their petals catching sunlight like fragments of memory. Purple blooms curled around the window frames, and moss crept along the base, reclaiming what time had abandoned. It was not broken. It was hidden. Rowan stared at it for a long moment, something tightening slowly in his chest. "Elena," he murmured under his breath. Ash circled the structure again. His body had shifted completely, low, focused, every movement deliberate. The relaxed companion from the drive was gone. In his place stood the K9 Rowan remembered from the field. Silent, calculating, reading the ground like a language. The dog paused at the spot they had uncovered, the metal hatch. Rowan crouched beside it again, brushing more dirt away. The shape became clearer now. Rectangular, clean edges, embedded into a wooden frame beneath the soil. It wasn't debris. It was placed here, deliberately. His fingers traced the edge, cold, solid, real. He pressed down gently. It didn't move. No visible handle, no obvious hinge, just a sealed surface. Ash lowered his nose to the metal, inhaling slowly. Then he stepped back. Not afraid, but respectful. That was new. Rowan frowned slightly. "You've smelled things like this before," he said quietly. "But not like this, huh?" Ash glanced at him briefly, then turned toward the cabin. The dog moved forward again, this time toward the front wall where the vines hung thickest. Rowan followed. The closer he got, the more details emerged. The vines weren't random. They followed patterns, looping around the door frame, climbing upward in almost deliberate arcs. Some were older, thicker, bark-like. Others were fresh, green, still flexible. They had been guided, not grown wild. Rowan reached out and parted the vines. Behind them, wood appeared. A door, old, weathered, but intact. A heavy iron lock sat at its center. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the key. For a moment, he didn't move. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Ash stood beside him, ears forward, body still. Rowan slid the key into the lock. It fit. Of course it did. He turned it slowly. At first, nothing. Then, a deep metallic click. The sound echoed softly into the clearing. Rowan pushed the door. It resisted, swollen from years of weather. He leaned his shoulder into it. Wood creaked. Hinges groaned. Then, with a slow, heavy movement, the door gave way. As it opened, something unexpected happened. A soft cascade of white petals drifted down from above the doorway. They fell gently, swirling in the air before settling at Rowan's feet. Ash stepped back slightly, startled. Not fearful, just surprised. Rowan looked up. Clusters of small white flowers hung above the door, their stems tangled into the vines. He inhaled. The scent hit him immediately. Sweet, warm, familiar. His breath caught. Jasmine, or something close to it. He closed his eyes for a second, and just like that, he was somewhere else. A porch at sunset, a cup of tea in his hands. Elena sitting across from him, smiling softly as the wind moved through her hair. "You always forget to slow down," she had once said. Rowan opened his eyes again. The cabin stood before him, waiting. Inside, darkness swallowed the light. Rowan reached into his bag and pulled out a flashlight. The beam cut through the shadows, revealing shapes slowly. Wooden shelves, a table, glass jars. Not decay, not ruin. Order. Ash stepped in first. His paws moved carefully across the floorboards, his nose working constantly, but without urgency. Rowan followed. The air inside was different. Earthy, herbal, alive. Bundles of dried plants hung from the ceiling. Rows of jars lined the shelves, each one labeled in neat handwriting. Some held crushed leaves, others seeds. A few contained liquids of varying colors. Nothing was random. Everything had a place. Rowan moved deeper into the room. His eyes scanned the surfaces, the corners, the details. On the far wall, a series of notebooks were stacked in careful order. Dates written along the spines. Years. He stepped closer. His fingers hovered over the first one, then pulled it free. The cover was worn, edges softened from use. He opened it. Inside, pages filled with handwriting. Elena's handwriting. Precise, clean, consistent. Rows of notes, diagrams of plants, measurements, observations. Rowan's chest tightened. "This wasn't a hobby," he whispered. Ash stopped near the center of the room. He lowered his head, sniffing the floor. Then he froze. His ears lifted slightly. Rowan noticed immediately. "What is it?" Ash didn't bark. He didn't growl. Instead, he slowly turned his head toward Rowan. And for a brief moment, there was something in his eyes Rowan had never seen before. Recognition. Not of danger, but of memory. Ash stepped back from the center of the room, and then, very slowly, he lay down. Not casually, not resting. He lowered himself with intention, placing his body flat against the floorboards, exactly like he used to do in the field, when he had located something buried. But this time, he wasn't digging. He was waiting. Rowan's pulse slowed. That wasn't how Ash worked. Not unless you've seen this before, Rowan murmured. His eyes shifted around the room, then back to the dog. You've been here, haven't you? Ash didn't move, but his tail tapped once against the wood. A quiet answer. And in that moment, Rowan felt something shift inside him. Not shock, not fear, something deeper. Something that felt like standing at the edge of a truth that had been waiting for him long before he ever thought to look. Rowan moved slowly toward Ash. He crouched beside him and pressed his hand against the floor. Solid, but not entirely. There was a faint difference, a subtle hollow beneath the wood. He knocked once. A dull, muted sound answered back. Rowan exhaled slowly. "Elena," he whispered again. Ash lifted his head slightly, watching him. Not leading, not pushing, just waiting. Rowan sat back on his heels. He looked around the room again, the jars, the notes, the carefully preserved plants. This place wasn't abandoned. It had been maintained, protected, used, and not just once or twice, for years. He stood slowly and walked back toward the door. The clearing outside glowed under the afternoon sun, peaceful, untouched. But now Rowan understood something he hadn't before. This place wasn't hidden because it was worthless. It was hidden because it mattered. He stepped back inside. The door creaked softly as he pushed it closed behind him. Ash stood up, moved closer. Rowan placed his hand on the dog's neck. "All right," he said quietly. His voice was steadier now. "We're not leaving." Ash's tail moved once. The forest outside remained calm, as if nothing had changed. But inside the cabin, something had begun, and neither of them would walk away from it. The cabin did not feel empty anymore. It breathed. Not in the way a living thing breathes, but in the way a place holds memory. Quietly, patiently, as if it had been waiting for someone to return and listen. Rowan Hale remained seated on the wooden floor, the letter still in his hand. The edges of the paper had softened over time, worn not by weather, but by being folded and unfolded again and again. Elena must have written it slowly, carefully, perhaps even hesitated between sentences. Ash sat beside him, his body pressed lightly against Rowan's leg. The dog's presence was steady, grounding, but not intrusive. His amber eyes moved between Rowan and the room, alert but calm. Rowan read the letter again, not because he needed to understand the words, but because he was trying to understand the silence between them. Elena had never been reckless. She wasn't the type to chase impossible things. She had always been practical, precise. The kind of woman who labeled spice jars and fixed broken hinges before they became problems. And yet, she had spent years building this, alone. Rowan lowered the letter slowly. His eyes drifted across the cabin again. The shelves, the jars, the hanging plants. Every inch of this place carried intention, not desperation, not obsession, purpose. He pushed himself to his feet, moving carefully as if he were walking through something fragile. "Ash," he said quietly. The dog rose immediately. Rowan stepped toward the small metal box again, the one that had held the letter. He examined it more closely this time. The inside wasn't empty. Beneath where the letter had rested, there was a thin, false bottom. He pressed it. It shifted. Rowan slid his fingers underneath and lifted it. Inside was a narrow compartment, barely visible unless you knew where to look. And inside that, a small leather-bound notebook, older than the others, more worn. He opened it. The first page wasn't filled with data. It was a date. 12 years ago. Rowan's brow furrowed. He turned the page. The writing was Elena's, but different. Less precise, more personal. I don't know if this will work. I don't even know if I understand enough yet. But I can't sit and wait for his pain to get worse. I see it in his eyes, even when he thinks I don't. Rowan stopped breathing for a second. Ash shifted slightly, sensing the change in him. Rowan turned another page. Today I tried the first extraction. Failed. The compound broke down too fast. I felt foolish, but also strangely certain I'm close to something. Another page. He asked why I've been gone so much. I lied. I hate that I lied. But I hate the thought of him knowing more. Rowan swallowed hard. The pages blurred slightly as his vision tightened. This wasn't a perfect story. It wasn't a miracle built overnight. It was failure, doubt, persistence, and love that refused to stop. He moved to the work table near the center of the room. Glass jars lined its surface, some labeled, some not. He picked one up. Inside were crushed leaves, dried and preserved. The scent that lingered in the cabin seemed to come from here, earthy, sharp, with a faint sweetness beneath it. His fingers traced the label. Not scientific terminology, not formal, Elena's own system. He set it down carefully. Ash moved ahead of him again, nose low, tracing invisible paths across the wooden floor. This time, he didn't stop in the center. He moved toward the far wall. There, against the wood, stood a narrow cabinet Rowan hadn't noticed before. It was plain, almost too plain. Built to blend in, Ash sat in front of it. Still, waiting. Rowan approached slowly. He reached for the cabinet door and opened it. Inside. Nothing at first glance, just empty shelves. But Ash let out a quiet breath, then nudged the bottom shelf with his nose. Rowan crouched. He pressed down on the wood. A soft click. The panel shifted inward. Hidden compartment. Rowan pulled it open. Inside lay a flat metal container, no larger than a book. Cold. Heavier than it looked. He turned it over. There was no lock, only a latch. He opened it. Inside, rows of sealed envelopes, each one labeled, not with scientific terms, with names. Rowan froze. He picked one up. Caleb Vance. Another. L. Brooks. Another. Case number 17. Chronic nerve trauma. Rowan's chest tightened. These weren't random. These were people. Real people. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened one of the envelopes. Inside was a short note, handwritten. Initial relief observed after 3 weeks. Subject reports reduced pain intensity, improved sleep, needs further monitoring. Rowan exhaled slowly. This wasn't just about him. It had never been just about him. Ash suddenly stood up. Not abruptly, not alarmed, but aware. His ears angled toward the far corner of the cabin. Not the door, not outside. Inside. Rowan followed his gaze. There was nothing there, just shadow. But Ash took a slow step forward. Then another. His posture shifted. Not into aggression, but into something Rowan hadn't seen in a long time. Recognition, mixed with hesitation. The dog stopped. His nose lifted slightly, testing the air. Then, quietly, almost reverently, he sat. Not guarding, not warning, but acknowledging. Rowan felt a strange chill move through him. Not fear, something else. Something that felt like presence. He didn't speak. Neither did the forest outside. But in that moment, Rowan understood something without words. Ash wasn't just remembering the place. He was remembering her. The moment passed. Ash shook his head once, as if resetting himself, then turned back toward Rowan. The tension eased, but it didn't disappear entirely. Rowan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He closed the envelope carefully and placed it back inside the container. Then he looked at the rest. Names he didn't recognize. Some with notes, some with none. Elena hadn't just been experimenting. She had been helping people. Quietly. Without recognition. Without permission. Without telling him. Rowan sat back on his heels. A strange weight settled over him. Not just grief, not just shock. Responsibility. He looked around the cabin again. Everything felt different now. Not a hidden place. Not a secret. A continuation. Ash walked back to his side and sat. Rowan placed his hand on the dog's neck. "She didn't stop with me," he said quietly. Ash's tail moved once. Rowan stood. He walked toward the door and pushed it open. The light outside had shifted. Afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the clearing. The world looked the same, but it wasn't. He stepped outside, boots pressing into the earth. The hatch still lay uncovered beside the cabin wall. He walked toward it slowly, knelt, placed his hand on the cold metal again. This time it didn't feel like a mystery. It felt like an extension. Whatever was inside the cabin, this was where it had started. Ash stood beside him. Still. Waiting. Rowan looked out toward the trees beyond the clearing. Somewhere out there, people were living their lives, unaware, unknowing, and yet connected to this place by something Elena had built. He exhaled slowly, then stood. He didn't open the hatch. Not yet. Instead, he turned back toward the cabin, toward the work table, toward the notebooks, toward everything Elena had left behind. He wasn't ready to dig deeper, not until he understood what he was stepping into. Ash followed him back inside. The door closed behind them, and for the first time since Elena's death, Rowan didn't feel like he was standing at the end of something. He felt like he was standing at the beginning. The cabin no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a line had been crossed. Rowan Hale stood frozen for half a second after Ash's low growl cut through the still air. It wasn't loud, but it carried weight. The kind of warning that came not from fear, but from certainty. Someone was outside. Not the forest, not the wind, not an animal. Someone. Rowan moved instantly. Years of training didn't ask permission. His body reacted before a thought could catch up. He closed the metal container inside the vault, lowered the lid of the hidden compartment, and slid the floorboard back into place. Every movement was controlled, precise, silent. Ash had already shifted positions. He stood near the door now, body angled slightly forward, muscles tight beneath his coat. His ears were locked onto the sound outside, his breathing slow and measured. No barking. That alone told Rowan everything. Whoever was out there, Ash did not want to give away their position. Rowan reached for the flashlight and turned it off. Darkness folded around them. Only thin lines of daylight filtered through the gaps in the vines covering the doorway. The sound came again. A crunch. Dry gravel shifting under careful weight. Not hurried. Not clumsy. Deliberate. Rowan stepped closer to the door, placing one hand lightly against the wooden frame. He tilted his head, listening, not just for movement, but for rhythm. There. A pause. Then another step. The kind of movement someone made when they didn't want to be heard. Rowan's jaw tightened. "Not lost," he whispered under his breath. Ash's growl deepened, barely audible. Agreed. A shadow moved across the thin light filtering through the vines. Then a voice followed. "Well now." It wasn't loud. It wasn't threatening. But it didn't belong here. Rowan exhaled slowly. He recognized that voice. Victor Crane. Rowan stepped forward and pushed through the curtain of vines, stepping out into the clearing. Victor stood about 10 feet away. Up close, he looked exactly the way Rowan remembered. But now, the setting made something else visible beneath the surface. His coat was too clean for the terrain, his boots expensive but already dusted with dirt he clearly wasn't used to. His posture remained confident, but there was tension in his shoulders, a slight stiffness that suggested this place unsettled him. "You really came out here," Victor said, glancing around the clearing. "Didn't think you would." Rowan crossed his arms slowly, keeping his stance relaxed but grounded. "You followed me," Rowan said. Victor smirked. "I prefer to think of it as curiosity." Ash stepped forward, placing himself just slightly ahead of Rowan. His body blocked the entrance of the cabin without needing to be told. Victor noticed. His smile thinned. "Still don't like me, huh?" he muttered. Ash didn't respond, but his eyes didn't leave Victor. Victor took a slow step closer to the cabin, his gaze drifting past Rowan's shoulder, trying to see inside. "What's in there?" he asked. "Nothing for you," Rowan replied calmly. Victor chuckled. "That's funny," he said, "because I'm starting to think it's worth a lot more than you realize." Rowan didn't move, didn't answer. Victor watched him for a moment, studying the silence. Then his eyes shifted downward, to the ground, to the spot near the cabin wall, the exposed edge of the hatch. His expression changed, subtle but unmistakable. Interest. "Now what's that?" Victor said quietly. He stepped toward it. Ash exploded forward with a sharp, thunderous bark. Victor flinched hard, stumbling back a step. "Jesus!" he snapped. The dog didn't advance further. He didn't need to. The message had been delivered. Victor raised both hands slightly, backing off. All right, he muttered. "I get it." Rowan's voice remained steady. "You should leave." Victor's eyes narrowed. "You don't get to tell me that," he said, irritation creeping into his tone. "This isn't just your land. Elena was my cousin too." Rowan met his gaze. "You laughed at her will." Victor hesitated, just for a moment. Then he shrugged. "That doesn't mean I don't know how to recognize something valuable," he said. There it was. Not grief, not curiosity. Value. Victor's eyes flicked once more toward the cabin. Then, almost absent-mindedly, he said, "You know, someone from the university came asking about her last year." Rowan's expression didn't change, but something inside him did. Victor continued, pacing slowly. "Didn't think much of it at the time. Thought it was just one of her little projects. But now," he gestured toward the cabin, toward the vines, toward the hidden hatch. "Now I'm thinking she wasn't just playing with plants." Rowan's pulse slowed. Not faster. Slower. The way it used to before things went bad. "Who?" Rowan asked. Victor smirked slightly. "Didn't catch the name. But they weren't local. Clean shoes, clean hands. Didn't belong here." He tilted his head. They were looking for something. Silence stretched between them. Ash shifted slightly beside Rowan. Not toward Victor, toward the tree line behind him. A subtle movement. Easy to miss. But Rowan didn't miss it. Someone else had been here. Before Victor. Or maybe still was. Rowan stepped forward, just enough to reclaim space. "You're done here," he said quietly. Victor's jaw tightened. For a moment it looked like he might push back. Then his eyes flicked once more to Ash, to the hatch, to the cabin. And something changed. Calculation replaced curiosity. "This isn't over," Victor said. Rowan didn't respond. Victor turned, walking back toward his vehicle at the edge of the clearing, a dark SUV that looked out of place among the trees. Before opening the door, he paused. "If there's something out here," he said without turning around, "you're not going to keep it to yourself for long." Then he got in. The engine roared to life, loud against the quiet of the forest. Moments later, the vehicle disappeared down the narrow path. Silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence. Ash remained still for a few seconds longer, staring toward the direction Victor had gone. Then, slowly, his posture eased. Rowan placed a hand on the dog's neck. "Good call," he murmured. Ash glanced up briefly, then looked back toward the trees again, still watching. Rowan turned back toward the cabin, the open doorway, the hidden vault beneath the floor, the samples, the notes, the final formula. And now, something else. Interest, not just from Victor, from people who had already started asking questions before Rowan even knew this place existed. He walked slowly back inside. The cabin felt different now. Not quiet, not peaceful, exposed. Rowan crouched and lifted the floorboard again, opened the vault. The metal lid creaked softly. Everything was still there, undisturbed. But now it felt like time was pressing in. He reached for the vial labeled Final Formula, held it up to the fading light. The liquid inside shimmered faintly. Years of work, years of silence. And now, a clock had started. Rowan lowered the vial carefully and placed it back. He closed the vault, sealed the floorboard, then stood. Ash moved to the doorway again, settling down but keeping his eyes on the forest, guarding. Rowan walked to the center of the cabin and stopped. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, "We're not alone in this anymore." Ash's tail moved once. The forest outside remained still. But Rowan knew better now. Something had changed. Not in the trees, not in the cabin, in the story. And whatever Elena had built here, it had just become something worth fighting for. Night settled over the forest like a quiet warning. The light drained slowly from the clearing, replaced by a deep blue that clung to the trees and pooled between the roots. The vines covering the cabin shifted gently in the wind, their white blossoms dim now, no longer glowing, just pale shapes in the dark. Inside, Rowan Hale sat at the wooden table, a lantern casting a low, steady glow across the scattered notebooks. Ash lay near the doorway, not asleep, never fully asleep. His body rested, but his ears moved with every shift of the wind, every distant crack of branches. Even in stillness, he guarded. Rowan turned another page. The name written at the top stopped him. Dr. Mara Ellison. The handwriting was Elena's, but this section was different. More formal, more structured. Letters had been exchanged, notes attached, observations followed by responses. Rowan leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his face partially shadowed by the lantern light. He read, "Dr. Ellison believes the compound shows potential beyond initial expectations, recommends further stabilization trials." Another page. "She warned me about exposure. Says if word spreads too early, it won't belong to us anymore." Rowan's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the paper. So Elena hadn't been alone. Not completely. He flipped forward. There, a photograph, clipped to the page. A woman stood beside Elena in the cabin. Dr. Mara Ellison. She looked to be in her late 30s. Medium height, lean build, practical posture. Her dark brown hair was tied back loosely, strands falling naturally around a face shaped by focus rather than vanity. Her eyes, sharp, observant, held the kind of attention that didn't drift easily. She wore a simple outdoor jacket, worn but clean, and gloves tucked into her belt. Not a corporate scientist. Not polished. Real. Someone who worked with her hands as much as her mind. Rowan studied the image. Elena stood beside her, smiling. Not the soft smile Rowan remembered from home, but something brighter. Alive. Certain. He swallowed slowly. "You trusted her," he murmured. Ash shifted slightly, lifting his head. Not alarmed, just aware. The forest moved differently at night. Rowan stepped outside briefly, the cold air brushing against his face. The stars above the trees were faint, broken by branches and drifting clouds. He scanned the clearing. Everything looked still. But stillness didn't mean safe. He had learned that long ago. When he stepped back inside, Ash was no longer lying down. The dog stood near the doorway, body angled toward the darkness beyond the vines. "Easy," Rowan whispered. Ash didn't respond. His ears were forward, locked onto something distant. Rowan reached for the lantern and lowered the flame, dimming the light. "What do you hear?" he murmured. Ash's tail stiffened. Then, a faint sound. So faint Rowan almost missed it. Footsteps. Not near the cabin, further out, circling. Rowan's body tensed. Victor had left. This wasn't him. The rhythm was different, slower, careful, testing the ground. Someone else. Ash moved toward the doorway, but instead of barking or advancing, he did something unusual. He stopped. Then he stepped back, just one step. His posture changed, not defensive, not aggressive, measured, as if he were evaluating. Then he let out a single, low breath. Not a growl, not a warning. A signal Rowan hadn't seen in years. Uncertain identification. Rowan's chest tightened. Ash only did that when something didn't fit a pattern. Not enemy, not safe, unknown. Rowan stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper. "Not Victor?" Ash didn't move, but his ears flicked once. Answer enough. Somewhere in the dark. Someone who didn't belong. But not in the way Victor didn't belong. Different. The sound faded. Whoever had been out there chose not to come closer. Rowan stood in silence for a long moment. Then slowly, he shut the door, locked it. Ash remained standing, watching. Rowan returned to the table, but he didn't sit. He stared at the notebooks, at the name again. Dr. Mara Ellison. Elena had trusted her, shared her work, maybe even planned for this. Rowan flipped to the back of the notebook. There. A page with contact information, a number, coordinates, a note beneath it. If anything happens, she will know what to do. Rowan exhaled slowly. "Guess I'm not doing this alone after all," he murmured. Ash's tail moved once. Morning came quietly. Light filtered through the trees again, soft and pale at first, then growing stronger as the sun climbed higher. The cabin looked different in daylight, less mysterious, more real. Rowan stepped outside, stretching his back slightly. The familiar ache was there, but something about it felt reduced. Not gone, but quieter. He didn't dwell on it. Not yet. Ash stood beside him, scanning the clearing. Then, the sound of an engine, low, heavy, approaching. Rowan turned. A vehicle emerged from the narrow forest path. Dark, clean, out of place. It stopped at the edge of the clearing. The driver's door opened. Victor stepped out. But this time, he wasn't alone. From the passenger side emerged a second man. Tall, straight posture, gray suit that didn't belong anywhere near this forest. His movements were controlled, deliberate, almost rehearsed. His face was sharp, clean-shaven, with eyes that seemed to assess everything before settling on anything. Marcus Hale. Late 40s, corporate. The kind of man who had built his life on decisions that affected people he never had to meet. He adjusted his coat slightly, glancing at the cabin, then at Rowan. "Mr. Hale," he said smoothly. "Pleasure to finally meet you." Rowan didn't respond. Marcus stepped forward, careful with his footing, clearly unused to uneven ground. Victor remained behind him, arms crossed, watching. Marcus continued. "I represent a private investment group," he said. "We've taken an interest in your late wife's work." Rowan's expression didn't change, but Ash stepped forward. Just enough. Marcus noticed, paused, then continued anyway. "We understand she made significant progress in a very promising area of research," he said. "And we believe that with the right resources, that work could be developed properly." "Properly," Rowan repeated quietly. Marcus nodded. "With funding, facilities, distribution channels." Victor smirked slightly behind him. "And profit," Rowan added. Marcus didn't deny it. "Of course." Silence stretched. The wind moved softly through the vines. Marcus reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. "A preliminary offer," he said. Rowan didn't take it. "How much?" Rowan asked. Marcus glanced at Victor, then back at Rowan. $5 million, he said calmly. The number hung in the air. Even the forest seemed to pause. Victor smiled wider now. "Not bad for a rotting shack, right?" he muttered. Rowan didn't look at him. He looked at the cabin, at the vines, at the quiet space Elena had built. $5 million. More money than he had ever imagined. More than enough to walk away, to forget, to stop carrying this weight. Ash moved closer to him. Not pushing, not reacting, just present. Rowan exhaled slowly, then shook his head. "No." Victor blinked. "What?" Marcus's expression didn't change, but something sharpened in his eyes. "I'm not selling," Rowan said. Victor stepped forward, frustration breaking through. "Are you serious? Do you even understand what you're sitting on?" Rowan met his gaze. "Yeah," he said quietly. "For the first time, I do." Marcus folded the document slowly. "This could help a lot of people," he said. Rowan nodded once. "I know." "Then why refuse?" Rowan's voice didn't rise, didn't harden, it stayed calm. Because it wasn't anger speaking. It was clarity. "Because it won't belong to them," Rowan said. He paused, then added, "Not the way she meant it to." Silence. Marcus studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "I see," he said. He turned back toward the vehicle. Victor lingered a second longer. "This isn't over," he said quietly. Rowan didn't answer. Victor climbed back into the car. Moments later, the vehicle disappeared into the trees. The clearing returned to silence. Ash sat down beside Rowan. The cabin stood behind them, unchanged, but everything around it had shifted. Rowan looked out toward the forest, then back at the door. "This isn't a legacy anymore," he said quietly. Ash's ears lifted. Rowan's voice dropped just slightly. "It's a target." Ash didn't move, but his presence was enough. They both knew what that meant, and neither of them was walking away. Morning came without a ceremony. No sudden light, no dramatic shift, just a slow lifting of darkness as the forest returned to itself. The pines caught the early sun first, their needles glowing faintly gold before the light slipped downward, touching the clearing, the vines, the cabin. Rowan Hale stood outside, the small glass vial in his hand. The label was simple. Final formula. No branding, no instructions beyond what Elena had written in her own careful script. No guarantees, just trust. Ash stood beside him, his posture steady, gaze fixed not on the vial, but on Rowan, watching, waiting. Rowan turned the vial slightly, the liquid inside catching the light. It was darker than he expected, a deep green that seemed almost opaque. It didn't look like something that could change anything. But then again, nothing about this place had looked like what it truly was. He exhaled slowly and slipped the vial back into his pocket. "Not yet," he murmured. Ash's ears flicked once. Inside the cabin, Rowan moved with purpose, not rushing, not hesitating. He returned to the notebooks, spreading them across the table in a careful arc. Different dates, different phases, observations layered over years. He wasn't looking for hope. He was looking for proof. Rowan had spent too much of his life trusting instincts in the field. But this wasn't the field. This was Elena's work. And Elena had never relied on instinct alone. He read, page after page. Extraction methods, failed compounds, adjustments to ratios measured down to fractions of grams, notes on temperature shifts, seasonal changes in plant behavior, soil conditions. It wasn't guesswork. It was discipline. He flipped to the sections marked with Dr. Mara Ellison's annotations. Different handwriting, sharper, more technical. Where Elena's notes felt like someone building something with care, Mara's felt like someone testing it against the world. Compound stability improved. Still needs refinement before large-scale application. Another note. Side effects minimal in current trials. Requires controlled environment before expansion. Rowan leaned back slightly. Controlled environment. That's what Marcus Hale had been offering. Facilities, funding, ownership. Rowan's jaw tightened. Elena hadn't built this to hand it over. He knew that now. He found the page again, the one he had avoided reading too closely before. His name, Rowan Hale. Dates, measurements, pain levels recorded in small, consistent increments. 7, 6, 7 again, 5, 4. He stared at the numbers, then at the notes beside them. Evening dose, diluted. Observed reduction in tension. Another line. Subject unaware. Must remain unaware for accurate response. Rowan let out a short, quiet breath. She knew, he said under his breath. Ash shifted closer. Rowan rested his hand briefly against the dog's neck. She knew I wouldn't say yes. Ash didn't react, but his presence was enough. The memory came back slowly. Evenings on the porch. The cup of tea Elena would hand him without asking. He used to joke about it, called it her magic fix. She would smile, say nothing. Rowan closed his eyes for a moment. Not magic, he muttered. Just patience. He stood, reached for the vial again. This time he didn't hesitate as long. He pulled a small metal cup from his pack and poured a little water into it. The forest outside moved quietly, wind brushing through leaves, distant birds calling to one another. Normal. Everything felt normal, except for the weight in his hand. Rowan removed the stopper from the vial. The scent rose immediately, earthy, sharp, with a faint sweetness beneath it. Familiar. Too familiar. He tilted the vial carefully. One drop, then another. The liquid dispersed into the water, dissolving almost instantly. Rowan stared at the cup. Ash stepped closer. Not interfering, not reacting, just present. Rowan raised the cup slightly, paused, then drank. There was no immediate change, no warmth spreading through his body, no sudden clarity, just the taste. Bitter, earthy, real. He set the cup down and waited. Seconds passed, then minutes. Ash moved away slightly, circling once before settling near the doorway again, watching both Rowan and the outside world. Rowan leaned against the table, arms crossed loosely. He wasn't expecting miracles. He had learned a long time ago, anything that worked took time, still. He waited. It happened so quietly Rowan almost dismissed it. Not a disappearance of pain. Not even a sharp reduction. Just an absence of something he hadn't realized was always there. The tension in his lower back, the constant, low-burning edge that had shaped every movement for years, softened. Not gone, but distant, like a sound fading into the background. Rowan straightened slowly. He rotated his shoulders, carefully, expecting the familiar resistance. It didn't come. He froze for a second, not in disbelief, in recognition. His body remembered this feeling, from before the war, from before everything changed. Rowan took a step forward, then another. The pain didn't spike, didn't push back. Ash watched him, not excited, not reactive, just still, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. Rowan let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "She did it," he whispered. And for the first time in years, his body didn't feel like something he had to fight. The moment passed. Not completely, but enough for reality to settle back in. Rowan reached for the vial again, more carefully this time. He sealed it, placed it back into the vault, closed the floorboard. This wasn't something to rush, not something to use without thought. Elena had taken years. He wasn't about to undo that in a day. Ash moved to the doorway again, sat, watched. Rowan followed his gaze. The forest stretched out, bright now under full daylight. Peaceful. But Rowan knew better. Peace didn't mean safe. Not anymore. He returned to the table and picked up the notebook again, flipped to the last page. There, in Elena's handwriting, was a final note. Short, simple. If this works, he won't need to carry it alone anymore. Rowan stared at the words, then closed the notebook slowly. He stepped outside again. The clearing felt different. Not because it had changed, but because he had. The weight in his body had shifted. Not gone, but lighter, manageable. For the first time in years, he wasn't bracing himself against his own movement. Ash walked beside him, matching his pace. Rowan looked down at the dog briefly. "You knew," he said quietly. Ash's tail moved once. Rowan turned his gaze back toward the forest, toward the narrow road that led in, where Victor had come from, where Marcus Hale had stood, where others would come, because now, this wasn't just something valuable. It was something that worked, and that made it dangerous. Rowan exhaled slowly, then nodded to himself. "All right," he said. His voice was calm, steady, but different. Not weighed down, not empty, focused. "We do this right?" Ash stood beside him, still, solid, like a shadow that chose to stay. And in the quiet of that clearing, a man who had spent years fighting his own body finally stood without resistance. Not healed, not yet, but no longer broken. The forest no longer felt like it was hiding anything. It stood open beneath the morning sun, every branch and leaf alive with quiet movement. Light spilled across the clearing in warm layers, touching the vines that wrapped the cabin, catching on the white blossoms that swayed gently in the breeze. Nothing had changed, and yet, everything had. Rowan Hale stood at the edge of the clearing, one hand resting loosely at his side, the other brushing absently against the worn fabric of his olive jacket. His posture had shifted over the past days, subtle, hard to see unless you knew him. He no longer carried himself like a man bracing for impact. He stood like a man who had chosen a direction. Ash remained beside him, still, balanced, watching, not scanning for threats now, just present, his amber eyes calm, ears relaxed, but aware. The sharp tension that had once defined his movements had softened into something quieter, not less vigilant, just resolved. The sound of tires on dirt broke the silence. Rowan didn't turn immediately. He knew who it was. The engine cut. A car door opened, then another. Footsteps approached. 2 sets, one familiar, one measured. Victor Crane stepped into the clearing first. This time, he didn't smile. Gone was the casual arrogance, the mocking tone. His expression had hardened, sharpened by something that looked almost like frustration. His coat was wrinkled now, boots scuffed from repeated trips he clearly hadn't expected to make. Behind him walked another man Rowan hadn't seen before. Older. Late 50s, maybe early 60s. Tall, but not imposing. His build was lean, almost narrow, his shoulders slightly hunched as if he had spent more time sitting behind desks than moving through open spaces. His hair was thin and gray, combed back with precision. A pair of wire-framed glasses rested on a face lined not with age alone, but with long years of careful thinking. He wore a dark overcoat, expensive but understated. The kind of man who didn't need to display wealth because he understood how to use it. Harold Beckett, a lawyer, not local. Rowan could tell just by the way he stepped, careful with the ground, but not uncertain. A man used to controlling rooms, not navigating forests. Victor stopped a few feet away. Rowan turned to face them. Ash shifted slightly forward, placing himself just ahead of Rowan's line. No command. Never needed one. Rowan, Victor said. No sarcasm, no humor, just his name. Rowan nodded once. Victor. Beckett stepped forward slightly, adjusting his gloves before removing them with slow precision. Mr. Hale, he said. His voice was calm, measured, carrying the tone of someone who believed words alone could move outcomes. Harold Beckett. I represent several interested parties. Rowan didn't respond. Beckett continued. We've reviewed what information we could obtain regarding your late wife's work, he said. And I'm here to present a more formal perspective. Victor crossed his arms behind him, watching, waiting. Beckett reached into his coat and removed a folder. He didn't open it yet. Instead, he spoke. Your wife's research, if verified, and we believe it will be, has significant commercial and medical value, potentially life-changing value. Rowan remained still. Ash's gaze stayed locked on Beckett. Beckett nodded slightly, as if acknowledging the silence. However, he continued, without proper legal protection, that value is vulnerable. Unprotected intellectual property tends to attract complications. Victor smirked faintly at that. Rowan noticed, didn't react. Let me be clear, Beckett said. You are currently in possession of something that others will attempt to claim. Through acquisition, through litigation, through pressure. Rowan's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, in understanding. Beckett opened the folder. Documents, contracts, offers. $5 million was a preliminary figure, Beckett said. We are prepared to revise that upward, significantly. Victor stepped forward. You don't have to fight this, he added. You can walk away, clean, set for life. Rowan glanced at the cabin behind him, at the vines, at the flowers, at everything Elena had built, then back at them. For a moment, Rowan didn't see Victor, didn't see Beckett, didn't see the documents. He saw something else. A memory. Quiet. Almost insignificant. Elena standing in their kitchen, sunlight falling across her shoulders, her hands resting lightly on the counter. She had looked at him once, not smiling, not speaking, just watching him carefully, as if she already knew something he didn't, as if she had already made a decision he hadn't even realized existed. And in that moment, Rowan understood something that hadn't been written in any notebook, something no formula could explain. She hadn't built this because she believed it would succeed. She built it because she believed he would carry it forward. Rowan exhaled slowly, then shook his head. No. The word landed quietly, but it didn't move. Victor blinked. Beckett paused. I'm not selling, Rowan said. Beckett studied him. You may want to reconsider. This is not a simple matter of preference. There are legal realities. I'm aware, Rowan interrupted calmly. Victor's frustration broke through. Then why? He snapped. Why turn this down? Rowan met his gaze. Because for the first time, he had an answer that wasn't built on instinct, or reaction, or survival. It was built on understanding. This isn't something she left for me to keep, Rowan said. He paused, then added, It's something she left for me to continue. Silence. Beckett closed the folder slowly. His expression didn't change much, but something in his posture shifted. Not defeat, recognition. I see, he said quietly. Victor let out a sharp breath. You're making a mistake. Rowan didn't argue, didn't defend. He simply stood, steady. Beckett turned slightly. Then I suggest you move quickly, he said, because others won't ask as politely. Rowan nodded once. I know. Beckett looked at him for a moment longer, then turned back toward the vehicle. Victor hesitated. His eyes moved once more across the clearing. The cabin, the hatch, Ash, Rowan. Then he shook his head and followed. The car doors closed. The engine started. And just like that, they were gone. Silence returned. But this time, it didn't feel fragile. It felt earned. Ash stepped back beside Rowan, sat, not watching the road, not scanning the trees, just there. Rowan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, then turned back toward the cabin. Later that morning, Rowan sat inside with the satellite phone in his hand. The number was already entered. Dr. Mara Ellison. He hesitated for a second, then pressed call. The line rang once, twice. Then, Dr. Ellison speaking? Her voice was exactly as Rowan imagined. Clear, focused. No wasted words. My name is Rowan Hale, he said. A pause, then, Rowan? Recognition, immediate. Yes. Another pause, longer this time. I've been trying to reach you, she said. Rowan glanced around the cabin. She left instructions, he replied. Mara exhaled softly. She always did. There was something in her tone, not just respect. Grief, the kind carried quietly. They spoke for several minutes. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. Enough to confirm what Rowan already knew. Elena hadn't been chasing a possibility. She had been approaching a breakthrough, carefully, deliberately. And now, it needed protection. Not ownership. Protection. I can help you formalize it, Mara said. Legally, scientifically, without losing what she intended. Rowan nodded, even though she couldn't see him. That's what I need. By midday, the clearing looked the same as it always had. Sunlight, wind, stillness. Rowan stood at its center, the cabin behind him, the forest ahead, Ash beside him. The dog didn't move, didn't search, didn't warn, just stood, like a soldier at ease. Rowan rested his hand on Ash's head. You did good, he said quietly. Ash's tail moved once. Rowan looked out toward the trees. For days, he had stood there searching, for answers, for meaning, for something to hold on to. Now, he wasn't searching anymore. He knew what this was, not a mystery, not a burden, a direction. He stepped forward, just one step, toward the forest. Not to chase something hidden, but to move into what came next. Ash followed. without hesitation, without command, and behind them, the cabin stood quietly beneath the vines, no longer just a secret, but still the place where everything began. There are moments in life when we think everything has been taken from us, when silence replaces hope, and the future feels like an empty road. But sometimes, what we call an ending is only God quietly preparing a new beginning. Rowan believed he had lost everything, but what he was given was not just a place, not just a secret, not even just a cure. He was given a purpose. And maybe that is the real miracle, not something that appears suddenly, but something that has been growing patiently, unseen, guided by love, by sacrifice, and by God's quiet hand. In our own lives, we may not find a hidden cabin or a miracle formula, but we all carry something left behind by those who loved us, a lesson, a strength, a path forward. And sometimes, the answer we are searching for has been with us all along. We just need the courage to see it. If this story meant something to you, take a moment to share it with someone who might need it. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And what part of this story touched you the most? Your voice matters more than you think. And if you believe in stories about loyalty, second chances, and the quiet ways God works in our lives, don't forget to subscribe to Veteran Dog Stories so you don't miss the next journey. May God bless you, guide you, and protect you and your loved ones. May He give you strength when life feels heavy, and light when the path ahead seems unclear.